There's a specific kind of torture that nobody warns you about. It's not heartbreak, it's not loneliness. It's living 3 feet away from the person you're falling for, watching them laugh, watching them sleep, watching them exist, and saying absolutely nothing. Because you're just roommates. Because that's all you're supposed to be. This is that story. Two strangers, one apartment. My name is Nora Callens, 26 years old, graphic designer. New to the city, new to the job, new to absolutely everything. I had moved to Seattle on a Tuesday in October with 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and the particular brand of terrified optimism that comes from burning every bridge behind you and telling yourself it was the right call. I had left a relationship, left a city, left a version of myself I didn't want to be anymore. Seattle was supposed to be a clean slate. The apartment on Birchwood Street was not supposed to be part of the plan. I had found it online, a 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, reasonable rent, available immediately. What the listing had failed to mention was the roommate. His name was in the lease when I signed it. Callum Reed, 28, works from home. I had pictured someone middle-aged, quiet. The kind of person who kept to himself, did his dishes, and went to bed at 9. I had not pictured the man who opened the apartment door on the afternoon I arrived with my suitcases. Tall. Dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it one too many times and stopped caring about the result. A jaw sharp enough to cut glass. Eyes that were an unsettling shade of gray, the kind that looked different depending on the light, the kind you noticed once and couldn't stop noticing after. He was holding a coffee mug. Wearing a gray t-shirt and sweatpants. Barefoot, he looked at me, then at my suitcases, then back at me. "You must be Nora," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. The kind of voice that sounds like it never raises itself for anyone. "That's me," I said. A pause. "I'm Callum." Another pause. "Your room is on the left." That was it. That was our introduction. He turned and walked back down the hallway, and I stood in the doorway of what was now my home, staring at the back of a stranger, telling myself this was fine. This was absolutely fine. The first 2 weeks were politely unbearable. We operated on parallel tracks, same apartment, different orbits. I learned his schedule without meaning to. He woke up early, made coffee before 7. Worked at his desk in the living room, some kind of freelance architecture work. I gathered from the blueprints and the mutterings and the occasional quiet swearing at his laptop. He cooked dinner most nights. Real food, not the cereal and toast situation I had been surviving on. The apartment would fill with the smell of something warm and actual, and I would sit at my desk trying to concentrate on a design brief and failing completely. He was quiet. Not cold, just contained. Like someone who had decided a long time ago that words were currency, and he wasn't going to spend them unless they were worth something. I, on the other hand, could not shut up when I was nervous, which meant our early conversations were deeply one-sided. Me, talking too much about the weather, about my commute, about a podcast I was listening to, about anything that filled the silence. Him, listening, nodding occasionally, offering a dry one-line response that somehow said more than my entire paragraph. I told myself I found him annoying. I was already lying to myself by day 4. The thing that broke the ice, properly, genuinely, was a Tuesday night thunderstorm and a power cut that lasted 4 hours. I was in the middle of a client deadline. Laptop died. Phone at 11%. And I sat in the sudden darkness of my room and said a word I will not repeat here. He knocked on my door 2 minutes later, candle in one hand, extension cord in the other. "Generator in the building basement," he said. "Enough to charge your laptop." Come on. We sat in the basement for 2 hours, me finishing my deadline, him sketching something by hand in a notebook, 2 candles between us on an old workbench. We talked. Really talked. For the first time, he was from Edinburgh originally, had come to Seattle for a project 3 years ago and never left. Didn't explain why. I didn't push. I told him about the relationship I'd left. More than I meant to. Something about candlelight and the particular intimacy of sharing a power cut made me honest in ways I usually wasn't with people I'd known for 2 weeks. He listened. He didn't offer advice, didn't try to fix it, didn't tell me everything happened for a reason. He just said, "You sound like someone who made the right call and hasn't fully believed it yet." I looked at him across the candlelight. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's exactly what it feels like." He nodded, went back to his sketch, and I sat there with my heart doing something irregular and told myself it was the caffeine. The awareness after that night, something shifted. The parallel tracks merged just slightly, just enough. He started making 2 cups of coffee in the morning. Left one on the kitchen counter without saying anything, without asking how I took it. Because he had apparently noticed in the first week that I drank it with oat milk and 1 sugar, and had simply filed that away somewhere in that quiet, observant brain of his. I started leaving the living room light on when I went to bed, because I had noticed he always forgot to turn it off when he worked late, and then stumbled around in the dark. And once walked into the kitchen counter hard enough that I heard it from my room. Small things, invisible adjustments, the kind that accumulate without announcement until one day you realize you have been unconsciously reorganizing your life around another person. I noticed everything about him. I couldn't stop. The way he pressed his thumb against his lower lip when he was concentrating on something difficult. The way he laughed, rare, genuine, a little surprised, like he hadn't expected to find something funny and was slightly annoyed that he did. The way he always held doors. Not performatively, just automatically, without making anything of it. The way he looked at me sometimes when I was talking, really looked, like he was paying attention to more than just my words. Like he was reading something underneath them. I started wearing nicer pajamas. I told myself it was for my own comfort. I was lying. The first time jealousy entered the apartment, it arrived in the form of a phone call. I was in the kitchen making dinner, his recipe actually one he'd shown me 2 weeks earlier, when I heard his voice change in the other room. Softer, almost careful, I couldn't hear the words. Just the tone, the particular frequency of someone speaking to a person who matters to them. I burned the onions. He appeared in the kitchen doorway 10 minutes later, phone gone, looking slightly distracted. "Everything okay?" I asked, very casually, extremely casually. "Yeah," a pause. "That was someone I used to see, she's passing through the city next week." I stirred the pan. "Oh," I said, "that's nice." It was not nice. I did not examine why it was not nice. "She wants to meet for dinner," he added, like he was thinking out loud more than informing me. "You should go," I said immediately. He looked at me for a second. "Right," he said. He went back to his desk. I stood in the kitchen and burned the onions a second time and told myself I was being ridiculous. Her name was Petra. I knew this because he mentioned it once, briefly, and then didn't mention it again, which somehow made it worse. The unmentioned thing sat in the apartment like a guest who hadn't arrived yet. She came on a Thursday. I was working from home that day. I had told myself this was a coincidence related to my workload. It was not. He left at 7:30. Dressed differently than usual, still simple, still him, but clearly deliberate. Dark jeans, a shirt that fit well. I watched him go from the hallway. He paused at the door. "Don't wait up," he said. He didn't say it like it meant anything. It meant something to me. "I never do," I said. He left. I sat on the sofa and stared at a design project for 4 hours without seeing it. He came home at 11. I was in my room. I heard the key in the lock, heard him move through the apartment, heard him stop outside my door. A knock, light. "Nora, you awake?" I stared at the ceiling. "Yeah," a pause. "I brought back dessert from the restaurant. Figured you probably forgot to eat again." I closed my eyes. "Thanks," I said. "I'll get it in a minute." A longer pause. Then, "Okay." His footsteps moved away. I lay there in the dark with my heart doing that irregular thing again, and I thought, this is a problem. This is a very serious problem. The crack, the misunderstanding happened on a Friday night 3 weeks later. I had a work event, a gallery opening for a client whose branding I had designed. I dressed up. Actually dressed up, which was a rarity, a dark green dress. My hair down, the kind of effort I hadn't made in a long time. I came out of my room to grab my bag from the kitchen. Callum was at his desk. He looked up and stopped, just for a second, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. "You look," he started. I'm going out, I said quickly because I was terrified of whatever he was about to finish that sentence with. He closed his mouth. Okay, he said. Don't wait up, I said. I saw something flicker across his face. I never do, he said quietly. My own words, back to me. I left before I could think too hard about his expression. At the gallery, I met someone. His name was Daniel, architect as it happened, which I registered with a private, irrational spike of irritation that I did not examine. Charming, attentive, funny in an easy, practiced way. He asked for my number. I gave it to him, not because I particularly wanted to, but because I needed to prove something to myself, that I was fine, that I was moving on. That a quiet, gray-eyed man who made me coffee and knocked on my door at 11 at night was not the reason I hadn't thought about dating anyone else in 4 months. Callum was awake when I got home. He was on the sofa with a book, or he had been. When I came through the door he looked up, and I had the distinct impression he hadn't actually been reading. Hey, I said. Hey, his eyes moved over me briefly. Good night. Really good, I said too brightly. Met someone interesting. A beat. Interesting, he repeated. His name is Daniel. He's an architect actually. Something shifted in Callum's expression, so small I almost missed it. That's great, he said. His voice was perfectly even. Yeah, I set my bag down. He asked for my number. And you gave it to him. It wasn't a question. Yes, silence. He looked back down at his book. Good for you, he said. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something I couldn't name. It didn't come. Good night, I said. Night. The next week was wrong. Not broken, nothing dramatic, nothing that could be pointed to and named, just off like a picture hung slightly crooked, like a note played half a step flat. He was still there. Still made coffee, still left mine on the counter, but he was quieter, even for him. The particular quality of his silence changed, less at ease, more deliberate. Like he was being careful about something. I told myself I was imagining it. Daniel texted. We made plans for dinner the following Saturday. I told Callum because the apartment was small and the walls were thin and it felt dishonest not to. He said, have fun. 2 words, eyes on his laptop. I went into my room and sat on the edge of my bed and felt, with sudden absolute clarity, like I was making a terrible mistake. Saturday came. I got ready, dress, hair, the whole thing. I came out to find Callum cooking. He glanced up, that same half-second pause. You look nice, he said. This time he finished the sentence. Thank you. I picked up my jacket. I won't be late. You don't have to explain your schedule to me, Nora. There was something in his voice, not sharp, just tired. Like he'd been carrying something heavy and had briefly forgotten to hide it. I turned around. Callum, have a good night, he said, back to the pan. I stood there for 3 full seconds. Then I left. Dinner with Daniel was perfectly fine. He was perfectly fine. Funny, interesting, easy to talk to. He touched my hand once across the table and smiled, and I thought about gray eyes and coffee cups and a knock on my door at 11 at night. He walked me to a cab afterward. Leaned in. I turned my head, his lips caught my cheek. Can I see you again? He asked. I don't think so, I said. I'm sorry. He was gracious about it, which made it worse somehow. I sat in the cab on the way home and stared at the passing street lights and told myself the truth for the first time. I was in love with my roommate. I had been for months. And I had spent those months performing indifference so thoroughly that I had no idea whether he felt anything at all. Everything unsaid, I came home to a quiet apartment. The kitchen light was on. The living room was dim, his door was closed. I set my bag down, sat on the sofa. Sat with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been lying to themselves for a very long time and has just stopped. I heard his door open. He appeared in the hallway, like he'd heard me come in. Like he'd been waiting, he looked at me for a moment. You're home early, he said. Yeah, he moved into the kitchen, filled a glass of water, stood at the counter. How was it? Fine. A pause. I didn't let him walk me up. Silence. Okay, he said. I came home because I didn't want to be there, I said. I wanted to be here. He went still. The glass in his hand didn't move. Nora, I know, I said quickly. I know we're just roommates. I know this is a terrible idea. I know if it goes wrong we're stuck in a two-bedroom apartment together and it will be unbearable and I know all of that. Nora. His voice was quiet, firm, not stopping me, grounding me. I looked at him, he set the glass down slowly, turned to face me. When you came out in that dress, he said, the first time, 4 hours ago, I waited. I started to say something. I know. I cut you off. You look beautiful, his voice was even. That's what I was going to say. The apartment was absolutely silent. I've been watching you give your number to someone else, he said, and come home talking about him, and get ready for dinner with him. And I spent tonight sitting in my room pretending to read and feeling like. He stopped. Exhaled, like something was being taken from me that was never mine to begin with. I stood up slowly. It was never his either, I said. Something in his expression shifted, cracked open slightly. I make you coffee, he said, like he was admitting something. I know. I notice when you forget to eat. I leave the lights on for you. I know you take oat milk and one sugar, and that you can't sleep when it's raining, and that you bite your thumbnail when you're stressed about a deadline. Callum, and I have been very careful, he said, to do all of that without saying any of it. Because you just left something, because I didn't want to be the next thing you had to leave. The distance between us was very small, I crossed it. I stood in front of him and looked up and said, I left dinner early to come home to you, I didn't even have to think about it. His hand came up slowly. Fingers brushed my jaw. Like he was checking that this was real. This is either the best idea we've ever had, he murmured. Or the worst, I whispered. Yeah, neither of us moved for one long second. Then he tilted his head down and I tilted mine up, and the distance between us, 3 feet, 4 months, everything unsaid, finally, completely, closed. The kiss was not tentative. It was the opposite of tentative. It was the kiss of two people who had been waiting too long and had finally, definitively run out of patience. His hand slid from my jaw into my hair. My fingers curled into the front of his shirt. And we stood in the kitchen of our small apartment, the same kitchen where I'd burned onions out of jealousy, and he'd left coffee cups without explanation, and everything that had been accumulating for 4 months came apart at once. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing unevenly. His forehead dropped to mine. For the record, he said quietly, I never went to that dinner thinking it would go anywhere. I pulled back slightly. With Petra. With Petra, he confirmed. His thumb traced my cheekbone. I came home early, you were in your room, I knocked. You brought dessert. I brought dessert, he said, because I needed a reason to knock. I stared at him. You were jealous, I said. Completely, he said, zero hesitation. I laughed, startled, warm, the kind of laugh that comes from relief. I burned the onions, I told him. He blinked. That night you told me. I was cooking and I burned the onions. Something shifted in his expression. A slow realization. Then a smile, one of those rare, genuine ones that arrived like they'd surprised him. Yeah, he said. Twice, I said. He shook his head slowly. His hands were still in my hair. We're both idiots, he said. Complete idiots, I agreed. After we stayed up until 2 in the morning, not dramatically. Not in the way that stories usually depict nights like this. No sweeping declarations, no grand gestures. We sat on the kitchen counter, both of us, side by side, the way we'd never let ourselves sit before, and talked. Really talked. About the things we'd noticed about each other and never said. About the small, careful ways we'd been orbiting without admitting why. He told me the coffee was deliberate from day 3. I told him the light was deliberate from day 5. He told me he'd looked up my design work online in the first week. I told him I'd Googled his architecture projects. Found his name attached to a building downtown I passed every morning on my commute. I walk past your building every day, I said. I know, he said. You mentioned it once. You didn't know it was mine. You didn't tell me. No, why? He was quiet for a second. Because it felt like too much, like I was already, he stopped. I was already paying more attention than I should have been, saying that would have made it visible. I looked at him. You were already falling, I said. I was already falling, he said simply. No drama, no performance. Just the truth, said the way true things should be said, plain, without decoration. The next morning he made coffee. He made 2 cups, the same as always. Oat milk, 1 sugar for mine. But this time, instead of leaving it on the counter and retreating to his desk, he carried it to where I was sitting on the sofa. Sat down beside me. Close enough that our knees touched. Handed me the mug. I wrapped my hands around it. Outside the window, Seattle was doing what Seattle does: gray sky, soft rain, the city half visible through the mist. For the record, I said, I knew it wasn't the caffeine. He looked at me sideways. What wasn't? My heart doing that thing. I told myself it was the caffeine. He was quiet for a moment. When did it start? He asked. The power cut, I said immediately. The basement. When you said I sounded like someone who made the right call and hadn't fully believed it yet. He nodded slowly. That's when I knew I was in trouble, I said. I went back upstairs and stood in the kitchen for 5 minutes doing nothing. I know, he said. I looked at him. I came up after you, he said. You were standing at the sink, just standing there. And I stood in the hallway and thought. He paused. I thought, I am in serious trouble. And then you didn't say anything for 4 months. And then I didn't say anything for 4 months. I shook my head. We really are idiots. Documented idiots, he said. I leaned my head against his shoulder. He didn't stiffen, he didn't calculate. He just shifted slightly to make room for me, automatically, like he'd been doing it in his head for months, and was finally allowed to do it out loud. The apartment didn't change. Same narrow hallway. Same kitchen with the counter we were now apparently both comfortable sitting on. Same living room with his blueprints, and my design books slowly colonizing the same surfaces. But the curtain between everything, the invisible, careful distance we had maintained, was gone. He left coffee on the counter still. But now he handed it to me. I left the light on still. But now I called from my room when I did it. Lights on. And he called back from wherever he was. Thanks, small things, the same small things, just honest now. 6 weeks later, we were sitting on the floor of the living room, his blueprints around us, my laptop open, dinner going cold on the coffee table because neither of us had gotten around to eating it. He was sketching something. I was looking at it sideways as I always did, pretending not to be looking. You can just look, he said without glancing up. I was looking. You were pretending not to look, it's a whole thing you do. I turned fully to look at him. He looked up, those gray eyes different in every light. The jaw I had noticed on day one and never stopped noticing. I do a whole thing, I said. Several things, he said. I have a list. You have a list. Mental list, he said. I've been keeping it since October. I stared at him. He went back to his sketch, the ghost of that rare, surprised smile on his face. Callum, how long is the list? A pause. Long, he said. I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up my cold dinner and leaned against his shoulder and decided that was, without question, the best thing anyone had ever said to me. People talk about falling in love like it's a single moment. Like there's a flash, a click, a scene you could point to in a film and say, there. That's when it happened. But it wasn't like that for me. It was a coffee cup on a counter, a light left on, a knock on a door at 11 at night, a burned pan of onions. A basement, 2 candles, and a man who said the truest thing anyone had said to me in years. It was 4 months of noticing everything and saying nothing. Of pretending the most ordinary gestures didn't mean what they meant. Of being completely, utterly convinced that I was alone in feeling what I felt, until the night I stopped pretending. And he admitted he had a list. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't someone dramatic, isn't someone who arrives with music and lightning and a perfect speech. Sometimes they're the person who already knows how you take your coffee, who already knows which floorboard creaks, who has been paying attention, quietly, steadily, without asking for anything in return since the very first day. And all you had to do was stop pretending not to notice. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever been the person quietly paying attention, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because there's a new story waiting for you every single week. And some of them, they hit even harder than this one. See you next time.